They're just like, ah, it's the lion, king of the jungle. They literally like have the opening scene of the Lion King, and they're like, he's sitting there, look at him, proud and king of the jungle. I'm like, no. Welcome back to a wonderful review of Wonderful Precure. And before we even get into today's episode, there's a couple of things that I wanted to note that changed between the end of my viewing of the last episode and before I viewed this episode that kind of gave context, especially since I left last episode saying that I was going to be nervous about how they were going to handle the fighting of this episode, and that's kind of changed because of the summaries. So walking into this episode, the summaries let me know that A, there was some specifics on what the fight was going to be about. The summaries stated that for this episode, the fight was going to be referring to Kamugi being upset that she can't use her leash, which technically true. There's a bigger picture thing going on here, but that is technically true, which made me, that assuaged a bit of my fears. It also said that this fight that they're going to have, or this whole bit, was going to take 2 episodes. This was going to be, they were not going to deal with the gadugadu and finish him off this episode, and it would leak into the next episode. So then I was like, okay, well, now I know the fight's going to go for a while. So I knew these 2 things before walking into this episode, which I just wanted to give anybody a little bit more context to how I'm going to review it or thoughts that I have about it. I'm also going to go on a, even before we get to the episode, I'm going to go on a small little, like, rant that I'll put timestamps for, about, like, the way that Precure has handled fighting historically and my personal feelings on that. Back in the day, very early seasons, talking like Futariwa through Yes 5, the typical method that they did for dealing with fights was writing it that characters were just being immature. You would have somebody sit there and be like, I don't want to do my homework, and another character would be like, do your homework, and you spend an entire episode where one character just avoids responsibility, and then by the end of the episode they're like, well, I guess I'll do my homework, that's the right thing to do. And then they would reuse this trope over episodes. Like, the character wouldn't change, the character would still hate doing homework and be very lazy. And that was probably the version of fights that most frustrated me, and it's very on par for a children's show. It's a typical lesson, like, you don't want to do your homework when you're age 12, but then you probably should do your homework. But again, not very entertaining and not very enjoyable to watch when I was a kid and now, as I watched most of the Precure seasons when I was very young to this point. Then that had a bit of a change midway through, I would say around like Sweet and on. They then changed it to actually be more frustrating for the fights, where characters were technically correct, and it's just the world wanted them to fight. With, again, Sweet Precure being the prime example here. A whole bit that went across the entire season where both girls, Hibiki and Kanade, were like, we're gonna meet up at a specific big tree and then go to school together, and it's gonna be like, you know, just the way we start off the year. Both of them go to a big tree, but they don't go to the same big tree, and then they both are very angry at each other because they're like, I went to the big tree, you weren't there, and they're like, I was at the big tree, you weren't there, and they just assume each other is lying. And it's like, both of them were correct, but like, there's not enough patience, and again, it's like, they're kids, they're not gonna have tons of patience to like really explain what's going on, and they don't really have like the bandwidth to believe each other. Oh my god, it's very frustrating, and again, it's reoccurring for the entire season. I would say since maybe Star Twinkle, or even maybe a little bit sooner, we have, like, the writing has very much not had fights anymore, or at least not had like real substantial fights. I think the last time we had a fight was at the, like, a real intense fight was at the beginning of Star Twinkle between Hikaru and Lala, where the 2 of them disagreed on what method they wanted to use to track down the MacGuffin of the season. And that, I didn't love watching that fight, but it was very integral to the relationship that the 2 of them had, and they moved on after that episode. Hikaru and Lala did not fight that way for the rest of the series, and it was great. It was fantastic. They had like a mock fight between 2 characters later in the rest of the season, which wasn't really a real fight. And that's basically the way Precure has operated since then. Even like in Tropical Rouge, there's a couple of moments where characters are selfish or sassy, but like they never turn it into a real fight. They just hold back. And I gotta put more faith in the fact that Precure does this now. The way that they write fights is kind of not. They're borderline non-existent, which brings us to this episode and what they do here and why, spoilers for the way I'm gonna react, it's not terrible. I don't hate the way that they handle stuff here. I think the fight is necessary for how the series is going to move forward. I think it's too soon to say that it's going to sustain what occurs in these 2 episodes that lead into the, I guess, the purification tact, or the purification attack of the tact between the 2 girls. Don't know if that's going to cease these types of fights, because I still get the impression, especially I think with some of the titles, I think there's still going to be some issues between Kamugi and the rest of the cast that's going to be a little bit reoccurring. But if they handle it the way they handled it in this episode, I think I'm going to be a little bit more okay with it. Especially when, at the end of the day, it feels like the punchline for every episode is, well, Kamugi's behaving this way because she's a dog. And it's kind of reasonable for a dog to behave this way, which has worked so far. There are some things that dogs do that do not make me happy. Like if they go to the bathroom indoors, not a big fan of that. But for the most part, Kamugi's reactions and way that she views the world has been reasonable, and it's not been super frustrating to watch. So far so good on that note. All of this to say, let's start talking about the actual episode. We once again start this episode off the way that we've been doing for a while, which I've really enjoyed, which is it just streamlines from the previous episode. There really isn't a lot of like, and then it's a brand new day and random stuff are happening. We pick up right where we left off. We have the kid-eating penguin, and we take him back home, as we had just rescued him the previous episode, which, again, I really love. I don't love episodes that stand alone, but I understand that they have been written that way historically because the fact that they've showed up on TV and kids don't watch the shows in order, or they don't expect kids to watch every single episode. But I think it's because of streaming services. I'm going to take a bold step and say it's streaming services are responsible for the fact that we're having these a little bit more streamlined. Kids will probably just binge the show more likely than not, on top of the kids that will watch it as it airs. So I think the writers finally can write shows like this where it does streamline one into another, and for me that's all the better. I'd rather see writing like this. And then we get to see what I'm going to start calling like the wonderful Precure green, which is this lovely toothpaste green of the penguin. Like I think this is going to be in line with the color that Lillian is supposed to be. I just want to point it out. Just want to point out the color. Like, regardless of color wars, it's so funny because depending on the background, like seeing this penguin in the blue water looks more green, but you just put him against something else, he probably looks a little bit more blue. Color theory is just wacky and crazy. But his castle's like legitimately, or his like home is legitimately green. This is more of a legit green instead of like a mint. But we go right into the conflict here, with Kamugi restating what she had mentioned before under her breath in the previous episode, which I think makes sense. I think Kamugi keeping it to herself would have been impractical. Again, on the lines of being a dog. Dogs don't really keep stuff to themselves. If they've got an issue, they're gonna let you know. They're gonna tell you. And honestly, given the setup for Kamugi, like having this outburst comes off as reasonable, because we have Iroha go into this little speech of, oh yeah, we were able to defeat the kid-eating animal with the power of friendship. Like, it was all about friendship and working together, and me and the kid-eating rabbit, we really like got stuff done. So it feels kind of practical that Kamugi's like, I didn't contribute anything. I didn't do anything. The tact didn't work for me. I feel it. It's a mood there. But also one thing that's going to be important for the way this episode is handled, and one of the things that I think makes Kamugi's argument a little bit more reasonable, or a little bit more sympathetic, is that Kamugi wants to be good at like being a cure, at being like using the tact, in order to do it for Iroha and with Iroha. Everything that she does is conditioned with doing it for the sake of Iroha. It's not like Kamugi's like, well, I want to be the best. I'm the best. I should be able to do anything. I'm super cool. It all comes from, I really want to do it for Iroha. I want, like, it's very much the, who's a good boy mentality. She's like, I want to be the good boy. I'm the good one. I want Iroha to tell me I'm amazing. I want to do it for Iroha. No one else matters, just Iroha. Which is a very interesting way to approach her selfishness, which, because it's ultimately something that's both simultaneously very selfish and very selfless. Like, she's not doing it for her own personal sake, she's doing it because she wants to do it for Iroha and with Iroha, and she wants to protect Iroha and play with Iroha. It's not all about Kamugi, but in its own way it is about Kamugi. It's what she wants to be the one to do it with Iroha. So I think this, like, multi-level play that they're going for here is interesting and nice, and adds a bit of nuance to the regular conversation of a character that's being selfish. And the episode also does not hide the fact that this is what they're talking about. This is not, like, this is the lesson that we're taking away from this episode, is Meme very bluntly says there is something that Kamugi is lacking, or something that she's doing wrong that's preventing her from using the friendly tack. Like, they're not leaving that up to, like, interpretation. They're telling the audience, they're telling kids, what is Kamugi doing wrong, kids? How should you behave differently from Kamugi? I think that's a decent way of keeping this being a children's show while also having a deeper plot, which is not something they do amazingly in this episode, but in this regard, I think this is a good way to be like, this is a kid show, but also there's a very valuable nuanced lesson somewhere in here. And up until this point, Kamugi does, like, a little bit of whining, but it's not something that's huge. It's more when we get to this scene that we start to see, and again, they peel it back very slowly, the fighting that we're going to get. We are introduced to this poodle who is really terrified of getting shots. We also once again are reminded that Iroha is a borderline Disney princess and can assuage the fears of any animal. At which, at this point, Kamugi gets jealous and then starts screaming and has to get put out of the room in order to not scare the poodle by our lovely mom. I do like that here, the mother, despite not needing to communicate with Kamugi, and again, this is something just for the kids, the mom's not like, you're banished because you're being annoying. She's like, you're scaring the poodle. And we gotta think about others, people's feelings, which is very important to the lesson that we're throwing here. Like, you gotta be careful. The puppy was scared. All of this nicely wrapping into what we're taking away from this episode. We also cut to Mayu, which again, love the fact that these characters that are all being included despite not being relevant in the episode or with the main characters. I love that this is also doubling down on a couple things that we know about Mayu and Yuki. Mayu, when she's working, gets sucked into her work. And it's really important that they drive that point home, because without that context, this scene would look like the mom's being like, hey, we got a call from your dad, and Mayu's like, I don't care. I don't like you'd almost wonder that she has a bad relationship with her father if she's just straight up ignoring her, but Mayu is not ignoring anybody, she just gets sucked into her work. And then we see how much Yuki cares about her, because Yuki ultimately chooses to distract her enough to bring her back to reality so that she can hear her mother say, hey, your dad's on call. So we're seeing stuff that we already know, but it's nice to kind of reaffirm that and then drive it home, especially, again, the bit with Mayu getting sucked into her work, I feel like could easily be misinterpreted. They gotta really, like, bring that home. And then we meet the dad, because it's not a Precure season unless we have a long-distance parent, which maybe I wasn't paying attention. I don't remember what he does. He's just out and about with animals because it's the animal season. I do love, so the way that they're bringing this full circle, the way that they're keeping her and explaining her dad's situation relevant to this episode, is that they're like, her dad is in Tanzania. Do you know what's in Tanzania? Lions. So crazy. So crazy. Lions are gonna be real relevant to this episode. And you're gonna see me eat my words from last episode about the praise I was giving it, because whenever they talk about lions in this episode, I'm like, oh, I see that their research for this episode was watching The Lion King. I don't think they used Google, which, again, not to say that, like, Google is some deep, profound research tool that is used, but when they looked up information about lions, they looked up The Lion King. They just, they're like, look at this lion, king of the jungle, has a scene looking like the lion, like, they're just like, it's the lion, king of the jungle. They literally, like, have the opening scene of The Lion King, and they're like, he's sitting there, look at him, proud and king of the jungle. I'm like, no, what are you talking about? Zebras are not actually lining up and listening to lions. No animal that's prey is gonna sit there within, like, smiting distance of a lion. I'm like, get this Lion King nonsense out of here. They just, the way they handled lions in this episode, of all things, is what I'm going to be the most nitpicky about, and I'm going to try not to talk about it too much. And then for the most part, so far, other than, like, little outbursts, Kamugi has not been particularly intolerable in this episode about going about showing that she's upset. Especially here, I think it's great that she's trying to convey. She's like, I feel like I'm not enough. I feel like I really need to help, which is that's the core problem that she has. And again, it doesn't come off as a jerk move. It doesn't come off as being like overly selfish or rude or bratty. For her to be like, I feel like I need to be doing more. And then Iroha being like, oh, okay, I'm gonna travel, let's play ball. And Kamugi's like, well, that was fun, but that was not what I was trying to do. I need to be helpful. And she's like, well, you can help me by taking a nap. Like, Iroha just constantly pacifying the situation, but Kamugi still having the difficulty of even expressing the way she feels and feeling like she's not useful to Iroha. And it's really not until this point in the episode that they actually have a substantial fight with one another, which is the morning later we have the disappearance of the leash, which I gotta give it to this episode and to Wonderful Precure for once again kind of like pointing out stuff that we usually just kind of accept in other seasons. This is not by any stretch of the imagination the first season that we have some item of significance turn into a magical item and then just remain being a magical item. For whatever reason, on other seasons, we're just like, oh, this important item that had a function is now a magical item, and that's the case forever. Woo. And we just move on. Like, we do acknowledge that last episode, when they were on the ice bridge and the leash suddenly appeared, that it also turned into the friendly tag. Like, it's all of that occurred. Because I was like, oh, is it just like symbolic of the leash that it's appearing? No, it's a legitimate leash appeared and then became a magical item. And then Kamugi's like, well, hey, now, hey, I kind of like that as a leash. And then they actually have a real, like an actual fight about it, where Kamugi's like, but I want that leash. And you have Iroha like, it doesn't exist anymore though. And this is one of those moments, is that type of fight where, yes, technically speaking, they're fighting over the leash, but it's not about the leash. This is far bigger. There's a bigger picture. It's not just the leash. It really turns into that kind of argument because it's not so much that the leash is what's upsetting Kamugi, it's what the leash represented. It's the relationship they had. It was a very consistent thing in their lives, and now that leash has turned into something that she can't even use, and she can't use with Iroha, which makes her upset. And I like that. Again, this is a more nuanced fight that's still very understandable for children, but it's nuanced enough that like an older audience can appreciate what's going on. It's not so dumbed down and straightforward, and it's not like overly predictable either, which is one of the reasons why I love Precure, especially with it being children's media. It still stays at a point where it's complex enough that it's enjoyable and a little bit unpredictable. Obviously they're gonna make up in the end and then it's gonna use the friendly tack, but the way that they're going about it, like the fact that this is a two-parter episode, I wouldn't have known that unless, again, they told us that it was going to be a two-part experience. And we have the two of them actually kind of fight with each other for the first time. And from both positions, it seems reasonable. Iroha's like, there's nothing we can do about what's occurred. And Kamugi's like, it still makes me upset, even if she can't put into precise words what she's really upset about. Which is the other problem that is going on between her and Iroha, is trying to communicate to Iroha that she's mad that their bond is in jeopardy in her eyes, more so than upset about the leash itself, which again is why this is a nuanced situation. I also love that the parents are relevant. We bring up the parents a couple times, especially these two. Seem to come up as much as we see other characters in the series. And they just kind of, put their 2 cents and are aware of what's going on. And we see the dad being like, this is very worrying. The two of them are fighting. They've never fought before. And the mom with her, like, infinite wisdom being like, this is a necessary building block in their relationship. I agree with. I love that the mom acknowledges that. I feel like some series are like, friends should never fight ever. But I think being able to have conflict like this between friends and moving past it just speaking in reality, I think is just to show the depth of friendship. I think being able to fight and having the ability to be able to go through something very hard with one another and then come out on the other side better is good. If you're lucky enough to never fight with your friends, then more power to you. But I do think if you guys are able to fight and move on, it shows a friendship being stronger. And we've seen that again from Precure seasons where they do the fighting a little bit earlier and then we move past the fighting, we move past the bickering. I think it's better for it. Again, why I recommend Stark Twinkle. And then we have Iroha vent to Satoru. And honestly, one of the best things I think about these like Satoru Iraha interactions is we see how much Iraha feels like she's equally as childish as Kamugi is. Because I feel like whenever you put Kamugi and Iraha next to each other, Iraha has to kind of be the bigger person, has to be the older, more responsible individual of the two. And then we put her next to Satoru and she can kind of vent and be a little bit more childish and not have to be the responsible one. Which I think is great to see the spectrum of her character. As well as her be able to say that I don't understand what's going on with Kamugi, which is pretty important in the fight that they currently have. She doesn't know why Kamugi's being this annoying. And Satoru having the patience to be able to say, you know, it is what it is. He doesn't give very important words, but he does say that, like, things will get better. Like, you know, she does her things to the beat of her own drum. It'll all be fine. You'll get past it. Just the words of encouragement that you need to get. I also think that the chibi meme faces throughout this episode are pretty solid. I've been enjoying them. I think having these goofy, silly faces throughout the episode also keeps it from making the animation look like it may not be as strong. Like, almost every screenshot of this episode is pretty solid. I say that and we immediately get to the little dancey dance. It's pretty funny that we have, like, Satoru have a little bit of conflict here, which again, in every minuscule part of this episode, they seem to be trying to add more characterization to all these different characters, and I think that's great. It enriches the story. Because we have Satoru, like, literally standing there, running, being like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do, and it's like, aw. In his own, like, chill way, he's also, like, very stressed. He's like, I don't know if we should bring Daifuku. Which I guess also explains a couple of the episodes where the last few gadugadu, Daifuku has not been present for it. He's like, I don't know if we should bring Daifuku. I'll put him in danger. It's important. It's good. And then we get to the gadugadu, which is the one thing about this episode that I almost feel like there could have been a better way of handling it. They immediately start off by, like, running into this gadugadu, and they're like, it's a lion, and Kamugi / Wonderful is like, I don't know what that is. And we interject being like, well, of course she doesn't know what a lion is. You would only see one in the zoo. And I'm like, oh, but why are we putting so much emphasis on her not knowing what a lion is? You cannot convince me. You cannot, under any circumstance, convince me that an ostrich is a normal animal that's running around Japan. Or, like, a penguin. Like, even Mei, like, I don't know if rams are super, like, normal. You usually have to go to, like, Yi Mountains, like tall mountains, to even, like, come across something like that. I don't mean, maybe they have sheep in the area. I don't remember them having sheep. But Kamugi's like, oh, I've never seen this one. I'm just like, we've come across a couple of animals that aren't, like, par for the course. I think the only ones you probably would have seen would have been, like, the bunny and the tanuki. But I think we're reaching. I think we're severely reaching by saying that, wow, we've come across an animal you would have never seen. They put a lot of emphasis on this lion. And then we have what is actually, like, I'm stuck between I'm nitpicking here, but also they handle this pretty well. Kamugi is terrified of the lion, and we have Satoru come in with the explanation. The weak little factoid being like, well, he's the king of all animals. Of course, with, like, the power of hierarchy, you would be intimidating. I was like, that's so weak, though. That's so weak. Like, we're just coming up for an excuse for Kamugi to just be scared. Like, it would make more sense if it was, like, maybe a snake and she got bit by a snake back in the day, so she's terrified of snakes. But, like, this is just... I don't like the way this is written. I know it's so nitpicky. But the way, like, portraying her as being paralyzed in terror and whatnot, they do very well. Like, every shot of Kamugi being terrified is fantastic. Like, it's looked really good. You could really feel like she's terrified. And ultimately keeps her from being able to attack or move or protect herself, since one of the only things they're capable of doing, magically speaking, is shields, and we don't see any of those this episode. But they animate this quite well. They really convey fear especially well, especially coming from a dog. Like, can't move her legs, shaking. Here it is. Here's the screen where they pull the Lion King. These animals aren't doing this in real life. No animals are actually doing this. Also, I think those are ostrich up there. The ostrich. But this is the dumbest. This is like, they just watched The Lion King and they were like, yeah, this is what it's like. No. No, you guys need to Google some actual lion facts. Come on. Oh, God. And then we have these. So we decide to use the killing penguin power-up here. Oh my God, and what are these? These are... Oh, I praised the bunny so much last episode, but this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Friendy getting these duck shoes, honestly. Like, This looks more like a chicken than it looks like a penguin. She skates around, and somehow that allows her to somehow capture, like, there's some holes in this plan. She's like, I can skate around in a circle, and that's how we're gonna defeat the gadugadu. And then we also have Satoru in this scene, Mr. like, I'm always simultaneously out of the way but also in the very middle of a fight, telling Wonderful that she needs to get out of the way. There's some setup here that's a little wonky, but I'll play along, Toei. Kamugi, again, in a very noble way. Like, this is what's so interesting about this scene here is that Kamugi is attempting to save Friendy in the same way that has been successful for the most part. Like, this checks the boxes of what normally you do in a Precure series in order to get a power-up. Where she's like, oh, I've gotta get past my fear. I have to go save my friend. I believe and want to protect her and all that. And usually that's about all you need. That's all the boxes for how to successfully get an item to turn into a magical item that you can utilize. But at the end of the day, Wonderful sits here and it doesn't work. Despite having, like, the normal mentality that's literally the same mentality she had in the first episode, she overcame her fear, then went off to try to save Iroha as Cure Wonderful for the first time. That worked in episode 1. It's not working in episode 6. She not only, like, fails to get the tact to work, it disappears. It straight up removes itself from existence, which is just so interesting. I think this adds, like, again, to the level of, like, the mystery and complexity to this, because to a kid, this should come off as, like, why didn't that work? She checked all the boxes. Again, bringing up my boy Satoru. He gets to keep his head for this episode. This is a very intimidating shot of, like, you would have been a little screwed there, buddy. Again, I don't think that Friendy's plan was really gonna do what she thought it was gonna do, but we never get to find that out. Satoru, like, nearly loses his head, but the gadugadu just, like, very convenient. The typical cinematic irony occurs, and it's like, oh no, it's in pain, it's gonna go run off and deal with it next episode. Its mask also changes between, like, its typical purple to, like, a red and a blue. Small detail, don't know if that's relevant, don't know if the mask colors mean much, but something to note. And runs off, and everybody kind of is better for it. Except for these two, that we actually have what I think is probably the most actual fighty fight we have in it, besides just, like, some light bickering. We have the real fight here, where Iroha was like, why didn't you just go along with the plan? Why didn't you just run away and, like, hide? You clearly can't get the tact to work. And Kamugi being like, I want it to work, though. I wanted to be able to save you, which is why, like, my theory as to why it's not working is it's not simply just that Kamugi is being, like, selfish. I think one of the biggest reasons why Kamugi is not able to get it to work is because her actions are selfish towards Iroha, in the sense that when she fights, and this is something I've kind of bugged me since the beginning of the season, Kamugi has always fought and protected for Iroha. Like, several episodes, especially, like, I think the ostrich episode, she sits there and she's like, oh, well, do you want me to transform and deal with that because it's something you want to do? Is that something you want to do, Iroha? Instead of, you know, like, wow, people are in danger, maybe we should protect them. Like, Kamugi has not really embodied the typical mentality of a magical girl thus far. It's very much been, like, Iroha or nothing, which has been great juxtaposition for our last main character, because Cure Sky slash Sora, her whole MO was, I want to be everyone's hero. That was what she said over and over again. So we've reached a character who just wants to be Iroha's hero. And this is my theory, and I kind of hope this is the direction it goes in for the next episode, that Kamugi's got to realize that there are more people and more lives at stake outside of Iroha, and that she's got to be able to either fight for herself or fight for others outside of just Iroha. Like, there's more at stake and there's more important. So wanting to do something solely because you want to do it with Iroha is not necessarily the mentality to have, to be a cure and to be a hero. So that's personally the direction I'm hoping that it goes in, but I also can't guarantee if it's that or if it's just going to be more of, like, just basic selfishness. But we will see. And then right after our fight, we kind of move into a more quiet sort of fight afterwards. with us not like we don't lead that episode off on the like tension we had in that scene. Kamugi ultimately goes for the silent treatment, which honestly I prefer. In like the middle of a fight, like Kamugi's not sitting there being petty about things vocally. She's not being as whiny as I kind of thought she would, like a whiny, annoying, jealous person that there was a little bit of an implication that she could be. She's more like quiet upset. She's going straight for the silent treatment and just this lack of understanding. And we see also that she's a little bit more... Kamugi has a little bit more self-esteem issues than I thought that they were going to go for her character. She's like, I guess I'm not good enough for Iroha, rather than being like, I'm so good, and Iroha's just not seeing how amazing I am. I like that, I'm personally a little bit better that she's like, oh, I don't believe in myself enough. I don't think I'm good enough to be with Iroha. I prefer that. It just makes the character seem a little bit more humble. We've also got Satoru sitting here like a maniac, being like, oh, I'll go into the woods and I'm gonna go find the gadugadu and I'll let you know if I find it. What? Satoru! Again, king of being out of the way, but also in the middle of danger constantly. What do you mean you're gonna go explore the mountains and then let them know? That's not something you should be doing. The two magical girls should probably be going around and scouting the mountain. Like, it's one thing to say that Kamugi was in the way or Wonderful was in the way risking her life in this episode, but like, she could tank a hit. If Satoru got hit by the lion, that's all she wrote. Like, why are we risking it all? I don't... I get why they wrote it this way, but this is so silly. And then we have the very depressing end for it, which I think is the normal dramatics that we have for the end of an episode. It's giving a little bit of like the Cure Wing Part 1 episode to me, where Kamugi's like, I guess I'm not good enough for Iroha, so I'm gonna run away. And we end on this shot. I want to put out some theory information. I tried not to give too much theory of what I think is going to happen in the next specific episode. But I do put out what I kind of wish would happen for the next episode, which is a method that has been utilized by Precure a couple of times, especially since the note that we're finishing off on is Kamugi going her like separate way. I hope that this is something that is sustained for the next episode, that we spend some time with Iroha and Kamugi separated. Bringing this one back from ancient times, we have the episode in Heartcatch. Without going into specifics and spoilers for that one, there's an episode where the fairy ultimately has a fight with her partner and runs away. And during the time that they've run away, the fairy ends up coming across a little kid who also like ran away from home. And in the moment of like having this camaraderie with somebody else that's run away, realizes their mistake, and they're like, oh, I was bad to my partner. I should go back and reunite with my partner. I'm hoping that's kind of what Kamugi will take away from a situation like this, where Kamugi finds some other like animals that are like maybe helpless and decides that she needs to protect or something along those lines, and then is able to separately learn her lesson before coming back to Iroha and like coming to terms that, oh, I need to either learn to protect other people and fight for the sake of other people, or realize that Iroha has always loved her, and that just because she can't use the tag doesn't mean that Iroha doesn't need her or doesn't think she's special. Something along those lines. I'm kind of hoping that we'll figure that out separately, but we'll see. We'll see. But that is it for this episode. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye!